All right, welcome, welcome. It is Forward Future Live, Friday, December 5th, 2025. I'm Matt Berman,
I'm Nick Wentz.
and today we have an incredible guest lineup. We have Sunny Madra, COO and President of Groq. That's Groq, Groq, the incredible custom silicon creator. Here to talk about powering AI throughout the world. We have second guest, Logan Kilpatrick, Group Product Manager at Google, here to talk about Gemini, Google's incredible streak lately, some maybe new products coming. Next, we have Joe Floyd, General Partner at Emergence Capital, here to talk about what VCs are seeing, investing, how the landscape is changing with artificial intelligence. And then finally, Guy Gurari, co-founder of Augment Code, here to talk about AI coding and, of course, how the software development industry is changing overnight, pretty much. So we have a great show, but we have some stories to talk about first. Nick.
Heck of a lineup. By the way, I've heard Logan might have a demo for us, and I don't know what that demo is.
Yeah, a lot of
So
a lot of a lot of pressure on him to deliver today.
a lot of pressure. All right. So up first, Alex, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the screen.
All right, yeah,
Well,
we're gonna talk about some news stories. Here we go.
while that comes up, so Jensen appeared on the Joe Rogan podcast, and
Yes.
there were some choice excerpts from this interview. This is the one that really stood out to me. Jensen says, in the future, maybe just 2 or 3 years away, 90% of the world's knowledge will likely be generated by AI. Joe Rogan in the podcast says, that's crazy. Jensen says, I know, but it's fine. Rogan says, well, but it's just fine. And Jensen goes on to explain that he doesn't care personally if it's some stranger around the world creating that knowledge or if it's an AI.
Yeah, can we talk about Jensen's performance overall? I listened to it at least like three-fourths of it, and I was a little disappointed. He didn't have great answers for some of the questions that Joe Rogan was asking.
Ooh,
Like, what happens if AI becomes sentient? And his answer was, well, I'll have my AI and it'll defeat your AI. And Joe was like, well, what happens if there is no my AI? And he just didn't have a good answer. And there was a few instances of that. But it's funny because a few of my friends who aren't in tech texted me thinking like, wow, he was just on fire during that interview. So it's interesting to see the divergence of opinion on how he performed during that interview. But um,
interesting.
yeah, and then also his timelines were extremely aggressive. 2 to 3 years for 90% of the world's knowledge to be generated by AI seems overly aggressive, and I tend to be pretty darn optimistic.
Yeah. I mean, where are we today? How much net new knowledge is AI creating today? So we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
The Yeah, the divergence in opinions is interesting. I'm curious who you think might have the best response to that question. Like, is it Dario and Anthropic's work around safety and guardrails? Does he typically have the best response to what if AI becomes sentient and goes in a negative way?
I think you're going to get different answers from different folks. Obviously, you're going to get a very safety conscious, conservative thought from Dario. You might get more aggressive thoughts from Sam Altman at OpenAI. But you should have a good answer, a clear
Good answer would
answer.
be
And
nice.
I didn't feel like Jensen delivered on that, but you know, I guess we all have our off days.
Indeed. All right, let's do one more story and then we can bring on our first guest.
Yeah,
Now, this isn't necessarily an AI story or even an
it's
overtly
tech.
tech story. It's a little bit tech.
Yeah, it's
But
Netflix.
this is the headline that popped up this morning. Netflix
Yeah.
acquires Warner Bros. Studios and HBO in an $82.7 billion deal. And this is a cash and stock transaction. Ripple
Yeah,
effects. Yeah.
crazy catalog of IP. Some that they own: Sopranos, The Wire, Euphoria, Succession. Those are HBO originals. Uh, DC, Batman, Superman, the Harry Potter universe, Game of
Game
Thrones,
of
Lord of
Thrones.
the
Yep.
Rings, partial ownership, Hanna-Barbera for the kids, WB Film, Matrix, Mad Max, Dune, It, WB TV, Friends, Big Bang. I mean, so much there. But a lot of people don't think it's going to go through. That's reflected in the stock price today.
Well, if it does go through, one thing is guaranteed, and that's a price hike for all of you Netflix subscribers out there.
Yeah, I mean, Netflix is definitely being positioned as the future Disney, right? It's not enough just to stream content. They started creating their own originals, but they really need these massive, massive pieces of IP. I
Yeah.
think honestly, I'm most excited about Harry Potter. I am a big Harry Potter fan. My kids are just starting to get into it. So if we could see expansion of the Harry Potter universe, I'm all for it.
Are you a Harry Potter watcher at certain times of the year? Like my wife and
Well,
I typically dabble around the holidays for whatever reason.
of course, yeah, yeah. I mean, it just makes sense during the holidays, and yes, I will be watching it. I think it's still the movies are maybe a little bit too old for my kids. Too old meaning they are too young. So hopefully, I get to watch it because I just enjoy it.
I'm wondering, this seems like it would have been a good opportunity for Apple. Like I'm always looking for Apple to come on the scene and make a splash with something. They've been a little quiet recently. By the way, we weren't planning on covering this, but the departure of executives from Apple over the last month has been interesting. So
Yeah,
it
I mean,
seems like they're a company that needs a win and is definitely in a position to be able to make an acquisition like this. I wonder if this was on their radar at all.
I just don't think they do acquisitions like this. The last major acquisition they did was for Beats headphones, right? They do a ton of tiny acquisitions that they don't talk about much. But yeah, Beats headphones was the last one. I mean, they really do need to get their AI game in order. So acquiring a Frontier Lab, maybe I don't know, but yeah, we'll see what happens with Apple. They're incredibly well positioned still to win in the AI race, or at least compete heavily, but they haven't gotten their game in order yet. Let's
Indeed.
bring on our first guest, Sunny.
All right. Up first, we have Sunny Madra. Sunny has started and exited multiple startups, including Autonomic to Ford, Extreme Labs to Pivotal, and most recently, Definitive Intelligence to Groq, where he is now the Chief Operating Officer and President. Sunny, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, good to be on with you guys.
Yeah,
Hey,
thanks for
Sunny.
coming.
I've
So
been trying to get you on the show for a little while, man. I'm so glad you can join us today.
Yeah, I love doing these things, but it's been a crazy run for us, so it's sometimes hard to find the slot. But I'm excited. I've loved watching all the stuff that you guys publish.
you've been a little busy. I want to get into all of that, but maybe to kick things off, you can just explain for those in the audience who don't know what Grok is, what it is, how it came to be.
Yeah. Groq is an AI accelerator. We make chips, systems, and we run our own cloud service. The company was founded, and our CEO is still Jonathan Ross, who was the creator of the TPU at Google. He created the TPU as a 20% program, and then obviously it's gone on to become an incredible thing. But, left to take a different approach to building AI accelerators, which is sort of the basis of what Grok is, which is a deterministic chip for AI acceleration, built around a couple of key technologies, which is all SRAM embedded within the chip, a very custom high-speed networking that allows us to connect many chips together, and a deterministic compiler, which allows us to, take models and deploy it across many chips to make them work together. And today, our chip, which you guys would have seen in any of the benchmarks, I'm like that's a 2019 Silicon 14 nanometer made in the U.S. And so it really speaks to the architectural advantages of what we build, which is well in advance of LLMs and things like that are out there today.
Yeah, and so okay, you mentioned a lot of things there, and you mentioned the U.S. How do you think about how Grok competes with NVIDIA in general? Like, where are you positioned as compared to them?
Yeah, I wouldn't say like, compete. That's maybe the wrong way to think about it. Like there's an AI market, right? And in that AI market, there's you got to segment in a few different ways. First, let's start with training and inference, right? We don't play in training at all, and NVIDIA dominates there. Then when it comes to inference, right, you break it down into a couple of different categories. It can be things that are cost focused, things that are latency focused, things that are speed focused. And so, what we really, and then capacity, what we really think about is offering an entire stack because we're one of the few companies that make our own chips that run our own cloud service, and we're able to do that with a very low latency, high capacity, high output speed offering, which is what's allowed us to go from 0 to over 2.5 million developers in just under 2 years.
Nice. That is an incredible number. I remember when people first started realizing what Groq was capable of, by the way, Sunny.
Yeah,
It was last year, and you guys just like absolutely went viral. Everybody was blown away by the tokens per second, the inference speed that you can
yeah.
get out of these chips. So it's interesting to see like how far you guys have come. 2.5 million developers is incredible.
Yeah. And so speaking of NVIDIA, I believe it was your CEO, Jonathan Ross, who said that, they're a $10 trillion company in 5 years. And, that's double where they are today. Um, what makes NVIDIA so special here? And can anyone catch up? Like, is it possible for someone in the market to become truly peer-to-peer competitors with NVIDIA at this point?
Yeah, well, let's break that up. I said what makes them special is, NVIDIA has been doing this a long time. And I was listening to you guys before I joined, and you guys were talking about, Jensen on the Joe Rogan podcast. But, he really kind of hints at many of those things that make it special. One, he's been at it longer than any of us, right? Two, he's so deeply embedded, and NVIDIA, sorry, is so deeply embedded with the labs that they're not. What you
Mm.
see from NVIDIA today is work that was happening years ago, right? And so and the other special thing about NVIDIA is they're really kind of put out what their roadmap is. It's very rare, in today's world in tech for someone to tell you, like, they're talking about Rubin and Ultra Rubin and CPX and all these kind of other things because they're already working on that. So I do think that's one of the things that make them special. I think when you think about, can anybody catch up? This is something that's really interesting where the market size is growing so fast that no one company can capture all the market. You read those incredible stories about Larry Ellison and Elon having to take Jensen to Nobu to basically ask for 100,000
Yeah.
chips, right? That's literally, $3 to $5 billion, right? Depending what the price is. And they're not the only ones. And so I think we have this unique phenomenon where there's so much demand in the market. It's growing so quickly that, NVIDIA can't service it all just on its own. And it's creating opportunities for others to pop up so that there'll be kind of multiple players in the ecosystem. And so, I think, some of the estimates show that by 2030, there'll be like $7 trillion of spend, right? No one company can get that much capacity from any one fab or any place else. So I think it opens opportunities, but I do think, they'll continue to be in a leading position. And the more they grow, they kind of help the entire ecosystem grow.
Sunny, Groq has specialized chips, and compare and contrast that against having a generalized GPU chip. And why, like, if you're a developer, why am I choosing Groq?
Yeah. Well, let me clarify one thing there, right? Our chip is not specialized to any models or any of, like, the attention mechanisms of today. If you really go to the basics, like what do all accelerators, including GPUs, do? They're very good at matrix math, right? Compared to general purpose CPUs, right? And then within the matrix math, there can be special functions that are created because you're trying to do a very particular manipulation and you want to do that in a special way. And so, the Groq chip was designed well in advance of the attention paper, right? And so, with that clarification, I
Mm.
think really why developers come to us is at the end of the day, when you're using an endpoint, an API, do you really care if there's an NVIDIA chip behind it, a AMD chip, or a Groq chip, or monkeys on keyboards, honestly, right? You're just looking to get capacity, you're looking to get a certain price and a certain performance for your application. And I think, that's why when Groq decided, when we did that together, because our teams built the cloud service, to move from being like a sort of a hardware sale platform primarily to also offering it as a cloud service, it allows developers to basically go and pick and choose whichever model they want to use wherever they want to use it. And at the end of the day, then it comes down to how our hardware accelerates, that matrix math that generates the tokens for everyone.
So you had mentioned building chips in the US. Talk a little bit about why that's so important, and not
Yeah.
only at the hardware layer, but also at the model layer.
Yeah. Well, From the hardware standpoint, one of Jonathan's missions for the company has always been we build an entire American supply chain. So, for us, we are very uniquely positioned in that our chips today are made in upstate New York at the Global Foundries fab. Our cards are made in Carson City, Nevada. Our servers are assembled in Milpitas, and our final rack assembly happens in Fremont. And so, that's really rare to have the entire supply chain in the US, but we've gone out of our way to do that. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, we wanted to basically ensure that we had supply chain resilience that wouldn't be affected by any kind of geopolitical situation or anything like that, tariffs as well. And so that was foresight by Jonathan to do that years ago. And what I would say is when it comes to the American AI stack, one of the things that's really important is, we are in a I'd say competition against China, against exporting or diffusing our technologies, right? And so having something where all those components are built in the U.S., it really allows us to export that from a U.S. standpoint, right? And it really helps us push American ingenuity, American innovation, American manufacturing outside to the rest of the world. And what I think very few people realize is if you don't create the whole stack, models all the way down to the hardware, there's elements of the supply chain that become critical that we're not able to address in the case of some, having independence or some geopolitical or war type of situation. And so by pushing that supply chain, we've been able to do that. And by creating the American AI stack, which is what the Department of Commerce is doing today, we can ensure that we have a robust supply chain and we don't run into these issues like you hear about today with magnets and rare earths and other things like that.
Where are you
One,
seeing the biggest? One quick
go
follow
ahead.
up to that, Nick. Then I'll let you go. Where are you seeing the biggest bottlenecks in the American hardware side of the supply chain currently?
Yeah, I think first and foremost is getting the latest node production. So that's like when you hear like 14 nanometer, 4 nanometer, 3, 2 nanometer, to get that into the US. And I want to give NVIDIA some credit here. They've really pushed TSMC. I think I saw a release from them 2 weeks ago saying they're finally producing chips out of the TSMC fab. And so I think one is it's having the foundries basically build their latest fab technologies here. Two, the people, right? One of the things that's happened is
Mm.
you can bring the technology, but you need lots of people to operate that. It's specialized. It's a lot different than anything that we have in the country today. So I think bringing that capacity up is probably the first thing. The second thing is a lot of stuff that was offshored wasn't always just offshored because of cost. A lot of these processes, whether it's rare earths or whether it's making PCBs or making chips, there's a dirty process that's involved in there, right? So the environmental protections that were really brought in maybe over the last 40 years have made that difficult. And then just the experience, when something moved away 20, 30 years ago, you have an entire missing generation of people that don't have the experience on process and building those kind of things.
What do you think about the concept of just Americanizing foreign models like DeepSeek?
Yeah.
Like these open models like provide that opportunity, and it doesn't seem to be something that we're doing.
Well, I guess there's like kind of 3 or 4 big ways I think about what's happening in the model ecosystem, right? So first and foremost, the top models are American labs. That's good. That's American innovation. Now the negative to that would be the top models are not open source models from those labs, right? Now there's 3 or 4 big initiatives happening, which I think are great. One, there's a few companies, Deep Cogito is one of them, that are taking those Chinese models and basically, and others have done it as well, and they take it and they ensure it that by creating benchmarks or using existing benchmarks to ensure that they are free of any kind of skewing in any particular direction from their training data. And then two, there's new companies emerging. One is called Reflection AI, with a great set of founders that came out of Google that are positioning themselves to be the DeepSeek of the US. And so I think we have this really interesting ecosystem where closed first, open by big Chinese competitors. And funny enough, Llama was the #1 open source model for a while until really DeepSeek and some of the others came around. And now we see a resurgence of that. And I think that's a really, competitive environment. And what's always interesting is if you look at any technology, it tends to find its way as starting in closed source and making it open, right? Think about networking, right? And you guys may be too young for this, but like there's this thing called Novell back in the day, right? That was basically a closed proprietary networking stack that got defeated by Ethernet, right? Operating systems were closed until we got into Linux, and so I think we're going to see the same thing happen here. Is that the closed folks for now, there's an opportunity, but open will ultimately win in the ecosystem.
And Sunny, does Grok exclusively serve open models? And is there a future in which you might partner with one of the frontier closed source labs to serve their models?
No, actually, we do privately run some closed source model from labs that only offer closed source. We don't do that on our public cloud service, but we do it for customers privately. And so we already exist in that ecosystem. And yeah, we spend a lot of time working with many frontier labs now that are working with us to leverage our capabilities with our chips today and our chips in the future.
Let's go back quickly just to what you were saying about open source versus closed and how some of these technologies start open and then go closed. What do you think the main impetus for that is? Matt and I have talked a lot about how these companies who are behind will open source to catch up. And then once they catch up, like Meta, well, I guess they're not caught up right now, but it seemed like they were making progress before, and then they started going the closed route. Is that because of it's easier to rely on the community to develop these technologies faster, or is it a different reason?
Well, I think it's not like a straightforward answer. So let me try to frame it from the point of view that we get. I think first and foremost, there was huge cost involved in creating these models, right? And I think we can't discount one thing that happened, which allowed the Chinese models to catch up, which is the distillation of GPT-4 in terms of the creation of the sort of the leading models in China, right? And if it wasn't for all the expense and effort that went into creating, the earlier versions of what OpenAI has, I don't think we'd have as advanced Chinese models, right? And so and now that's happened, that sort of the cat's out of the bag, and all the open data on the internet's been already applied to these models. And so now basically the way I think the next say 2 years will play out is when it comes to any model that's built off all open data, I think that will definitely push to being driven by open source, because we've consumed it all and those models are able to create more synthetic data for themselves. And so we'll really see the frontier of kind of general purpose models become open source. And then a lot of the closed stuff will happen, and like it happens in technology in other places, in specific areas where the data is not open, it's not available to anybody else. And so I think that's how the market really bifurcates. And yeah, if I were to bet, I'd say, less than, sorry, maybe I'll say even in 2027, so at the end of 2020, sorry, end of 2026, uh, by the end of 2026, the leading models will be open source, not closed source models. But the closed source folks will lead maybe in math or maybe in science in specific ways where they had access to data that no one had access to. The other thing that I wouldn't discount is because the Chinese models are so frontier in many ways, the US companies can use those models to distill data for themselves as well. So there's been this kind of really interesting thing that's happened is where they can take those models, they can use it to generate synthetic data to make their models better as well. So there's going to be this big convergence that happens through 2026.
Sunny, assuming at the end of 2026, open source will be the leading model, let's say LM Arena or other benchmarks, do you think that's going to be a US open source model, or do you think that's going to be a Chinese open source model? And why?
I think it'll be a US open source model because, what I find is when it comes to innovation, and I'm really again excited by folks like Reflection that are focused on open first. U.S. innovation always tends to lead the way, and I think some of the things that got in the way before, which is the big cost that was associated with it, huge budgets for training, huge training runs needed. I think we're kind of past that era now. And you see that when the numbers are published for DeepSeek and other things. I think that allows the startup ecosystem to go after it. And when they can go after it, there's one thing that no one can really compete with, Silicon Valley or the US is innovation. And really, I will say, if you look deep into the model architectures today, even though there's some very interesting and exciting stuff coming out of DeepSeek, and even out the other Chinese models, the innovations within the US models, like specifically in the attention mechanisms and things like that, even what OpenAI has put in GPT OSS, are significantly more advanced. And so we think that will give the US the edge in the open source models as we push forward.
One more question on the open source stuff.
Yeah.
Why is open source so important? If you can explain it to a broader audience, why so bullish? And then why is it so important for these AI models to be open source?
Well, we see it sort of today in China, right? Because they push so hard on open source, they not only have one, there's 4 or 5 big companies in China with leading models. There's Moonshot with Kimi, there's DeepSeek with, R1, there's Quen, right, with their set of models, there's MinMax. And so, once you have an open source ecosystem, you get this compounding effect of everybody being able to work on it and contribute to it. Versus, when everyone's working in closed, each company is kind of duplicating the efforts that the other one's doing, and there's no compounding of that effort happening together. And that's why, when you think about, let's just go to like another era, when you go to say, operating systems, right? When there's a like a 0-day bug in Linux or something like that, the community comes around that to fix that, right? And that happens faster than even one company, even Microsoft can. And Microsoft, just has 100,000 developers, and so we'll see that same compounding effect happen of all these little tweaks that happen along the way. Whether it's in the inference stack, whether it's in the model attention mechanisms, whether it's in techniques to do training, we'll see all that happen. And you just can't. It's very hard to get that as a closed source ecosystem, as a closed source provider. Sorry.
And
Yo,
so,
real quick, Matt, just because on that point, we had Misha Laskin, the CEO of Reflection, on the show last week, actually, and he was adamant about AI not existing in this unipolar world, and a lot of it came down to this idea that we can't have all the power concentrated in one company or one country. And I think he talked about, if within the case of sovereign AI, if you have countries relying or locked into another country's AI, then that's a negative thing for them. They want choice. Do you generally agree with that perspective as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's here's how I sort of think about it. There's a couple of different factors. One, when it comes to countries choosing models and open versus closed source, when those models are going to be key parts of decision making, whether they're decision making for business, whether they're decision making for government, or whether decision making for military, you want to know that there's kind of nothing nefarious happening in there. There's been training data that skews it in any one particular direction. So in that sense, open source is important. Two, you want to basically be able to go, and if something is happening, you want to be able to hold someone responsible. One of the things that can happen in the US, which is a great part of our democracy, is that if someone were to create a model that was nefarious, you can drag them in front of courts, judges, even the government, and basically have them answer to what's happened. And you don't necessarily see that in other places. And I think that's important when you're going to try to build an ecosystem on top of such a powerful technology.
Sunny, last question for you. As you think about the American AI stack and you think about regulation, you talked a little bit about it earlier. Like, talk about what you think needs to change to really accelerate AI in America, and talk about maybe the difference between regulation at a state level and regulation at a federal level.
Yeah, I think, you think about the internet, right? We were fortunate that it wasn't regulated state by state. Because imagine, I just think about those like cookie pop-ups that Europe did to us, and how they
GDPR, yeah.
exactly. Now imagine that like on a state by state
Ugh.
basis around AI, right? And imagine now, although maybe the engineers would love it because it creates a whole bunch of work, the user experience would be terrible, right? And so, I just think like we have plenty of examples in front of us where regulation got in the way, and every website you go to, you're still accepting cookies in every way, different way, shape, and form. So I do think there needs to be kind of like a national strategy, and I think the current administration's done a good job about highlighting that. David from the AI and crypto czar and Sriram have done a good job of highlighting why we can't have this fragmented strategy, and it's why the internet proliferated and why the U.S. did so well with the internet. I think broadly in terms of the diffusion of the technology, today, U.S. technologies are under export controls, right? Even we are, and in order to export something, it's not a single piece. So that's why having the entire stack is really important in terms of export, because you're not just sending a chip somewhere, right? You're sending chips and models and servers and even cloud platforms, inference engines, all kinds of pieces. And so what the U.S. is doing right now, the Department of Commerce actually has an RFI open around, and asking for feedback from companies around how the Department of Commerce should basically help companies diffuse the technology. And that's really good. That's the dialogue between industry and government and around how that's going to happen.
Okay, great. And yeah, Sunny, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
Really
Well,
appreciate it. You are welcome back anytime. Go to Groq, Groq.com. Check out Sunny on X, Sundeep, Sundep. Sunny, thank you so much.
yeah.
Thank you, Sunny.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me, guys. All right.
All
Talk
right,
soon.
see you later. Awesome. Glad we finally got to have him on the show.
Absolutely. That's another one that just could have gone for another hour
Yeah,
easily.
absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, our next guest is here, so I think we should just jump right in.
Hell
Up
yeah.
next, we have none other than Logan Kilpatrick. Now, Logan is currently at Google DeepMind, working on Gemini and Google AI Studio and many other projects. He might be the busiest man in Silicon Valley. We'll talk to him about that. We're going to spend time talking about Gemini 3, obviously. Before Google, he was a machine learning engineer at Apple, an advisor to NASA on their open science program, and he led developer relations at a little startup called OpenAI. Logan, welcome to the show.
Hey,
Howdy,
Logan.
folks. I'm
How'd
excited
I
for
do
this.
on that intro? Was it all right? Of
It was good. The goal is always to live up to the intro. So, big shoes to fill for that intro, but I appreciate it. Very generous.
course, least we can do.
Yeah.
So starting off, actually, I want to talk about Gemini 3. We're going to talk about Gemini 3 a lot, but the reception to the launch was extremely positive. So I'm curious, as you're preparing for these big launches, how are you thinking about measuring success? Is there a framework internally? Are you looking at topping certain leaderboards? Is it the sentiment on X? Is it usage and downloads, a combination of all those things?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's some nuance to this and it depends on like which angle of the story you're looking at. For example, on the model side, like when we release a model, we run a bunch of evals, we sort of know actually where it will land relative to the rest of the ecosystem. The main thing we don't know is what usage and adoption is going to look like. And I think you sort of have to ship the model to actually answer that question. And then there's some long tail of like vibes and all these like very detailed use cases which you oftentimes aren't captured by the benchmarks, and so you don't know how the model will do on those things until you actually launch the model. So I think we sort of knew the model was going to be strong. We didn't know what adoption and usage was going to look like, and it's obviously been through the roof. There's not enough TPUs in the world to sort of serve all the demand that there is for Gemini 3, and also in parallel to that, Nano Banana Pro, which is based on the Gemini 3 Pro model. So yeah, it's been fun to see the adoption curve, and to also just see there's so much like nuance in everyone's use cases. And again, it's like it's hard to know like on a product by product basis or on a startup by startup basis, like whose company or whose product experience is just going to like start working because the model got good enough. But I've seen a bunch of examples of this on X over the last few days that like it just starts to work now. And I think like vibe coding is maybe one of those things that is like now really just working. And I've been doing all these demos internally and externally, and it's been super cool to see like how quickly that experience has shifted.
Logan, you have a demo to share with us today, but before we get into that, I want to rewind about a year. You've been at Google just about a year. A year
2
ago,
years. It's felt
two
like 10
years.
years too. We've
Two
been in
years.
DeepMind now.
Okay,
In Google.
yeah, I mean, this becomes even more of a critical question to you. 2 years ago, Google was not seen in the AI world as it's seen today, right? It was a very different, there was a very different perception. but you were extremely bullish. So what did you see? What did Logan see 2 years ago, which maybe a lot of the industry and even obviously the broader world did not see about Google at the time?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think my like slight reframing of this is I think people have always seen the reasons why Google could and eventually would be successful in AI. It was more, I think the question that folks were asking is like, why wasn't Google sort of ahead of the curve on some of these things? And I think it is interesting actually. In many ways, we were. Like Google has been an AI first company for the last 10 years. Search is like fundamentally built on a bunch of AI, like Google created the transformer, et cetera, et cetera. I think the thing that folks were sort of rightfully giving sort of critical feedback on is like there was this new form factor for AI, and Google had yet to adopt this new form factor for AI. And part of this is just like the challenge of having an existing business and a product and all this stuff is you can't just dramatically shift your product overnight on users, even if maybe there's something really interesting and exciting you want to explore. I think Google, for some of our like main products, has this obligation to users as the front door for the internet to sort of do this in a responsible way and sort of do it iteratively and help people understand the implication of the technology. But I think the key ingredients have always been there, which is like this full stack approach to AI and ever controlling everything from the silicon and the chips of the TPUs to the model development process to how we distribute those across Google's products and externally through our APIs. Those raw ingredients were there 2 years ago when I joined Google, and it was very clear that like you just needed to like actually run the crank and have the time to actually make all of that happen. And I think in this moment, people are, and I have this reflection often. It's like there's this time pressure on everything. And when you actually look at what is required, like what is one of the ingredients to be successful building AI models and products, one of those ingredients is time. And everyone loves to forego the idea that you don't need to put time into actually making these things happen, but it's a requirement. There's not like pre-training, as an example, takes months to do a single pre-training run. And like there's nothing you can do. It's just a law of nature in the current setup of how models and training work. So as much as I try to sort of impart this into myself, but there is a level of patience that you have to have. And I think if you have the patience, you can sort of make the exponential happen. You just need to be willing to wait a little bit, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about. Gemini 2.5 Pro was an incredible model, frontier, but people didn't realize what like Google's complete full stack approach and how incredibly well positioned they were to win or to compete at the highest levels until just a few weeks ago, seemingly. So it's
And the
kind of
full
wild to think about that.
Yeah, it is interesting. And what is more interesting is that you don't actually see the fruits of the full stack approach until later on. Like I think I like maybe Gemini 3 you sort of start to see this a little bit, but I think it's like in a year from now is where you really start to see like, oh no, there's a substantive difference in having made the investment in TPUs uh, 10 years ago and having your seventh generation TPU infrastructure stood up and having these products with distribution and all this stuff. Like, I think we're actually like just scratching the surface of like how important that full stack approach is. So it gets me excited as somebody who wants to see like all of that is ultimately in service of like making AI that benefits humanity. So it is like a very positive outcome. Like if we can put Gemini 3 in the hands of billions of users on day one, like that's a great outcome. People will get a lot of value from it.
Logan, is that going to be reflected in the model quality, the distribution, because you're going to be able to diffuse AI into all of your being Google's different products? Like what does a year from now look like?
Yeah, I think all of those things, like one, to stand up the level of infrastructure that's needed to actually make these models show up across all of Google's product services and be accessible, I think is like not an easy infrastructure and product feat. And I think you sort of see us taking a bunch of important steps in that direction for this launch actually, which was Gemini 3 launched the same day on Google search through AI mode, through the Gemini
So many
app,
different
AI
products.
Studio. Yeah, through, I think it's available now to workspace customers. So I think you'll see, and like, again, there's, part of the challenge of Google is there's many, many products. So how can we do more and more to like make sure that we're showing up on day one with these models actually accessible to the most number of customers? So it'll be really, really cool to see once we're like fully at the end of that journey. Hopefully it'll only be a year to make happen, but it could be longer just because like the order of magnitude of infrastructure that's needed for that. And then hopefully model quality, like ultimately, like I had a conversation with Gur-Ari, who's our CTO in Deepmind, but also the chief AI architect for Google as a whole. And part of the thread of that conversation is like how we're approaching building these models and like the path to AGI. And one of the things that he mentioned, which really resonates with my worldview as well, is this notion of like we're building AGI with our customers. And in order to do that, you actually need to deploy the models and put it into our products and have the iteration loops and cycles that happen. So I think you'll see even more like the deploying the models to large surfaces actually results in a better flywheel of like how we get feedback on what doesn't work well or what does work well, so that we can keep hill climbing quality.
Can you actually dig into that a little bit more? So that feedback loop makes a lot of sense conceptually. How are you seeing that play out? What are some examples of that?
Yeah, I'll speak to sort of areas that I know the best on the developer side, but like one example of this is in AI Studio. If you're an API customer, you can sort of like turn on visibility of your for your own visibility, like API traffic. You can go in, you can be like, oh, here are all my requests, and again, it's only visible to you, and then you can actually like select like here are examples that the model isn't doing well, and then you can opt to send those to Google, and we can be like, hey, we'll anonymize that data, we'll look at it, and we'll sort of hopefully help make the models better in examples where you're telling us the quality is really bad, or the opposite, which is like, this is the ideal output. Like whatever you do in the future models, don't mess up this output because this is exactly how my product needs to function. So I think both of those are really interesting pieces of signal. And again, we're super early in AI Studio. We literally just launched that like 3 weeks ago or something like that. So we're super early in that journey of like making that flywheel actually happen. And I think for every product it looks different just based on like the form factor and a bunch of stuff like that. But it is super helpful to be able to at scale get that feedback and keep making progress.
Logan, you have something to share with us. You have a demo. We literally have no clue what you're about to show us.
I have actually no clue what I'm supposed to show you. I don't know if you all have an idea. Like we can demo AI Studio. I think lots of folks have seen it. I'm happy to show it, but I don't have any.
We can just keep chatting.
I'm cool with whatever y'all want to see. If you want to build stuff, we can build stuff. If you want to chat, we can chat.
All right. I want to keep chatting. We'll think about a demo for a second. So obviously we've talked about how well positioned Google is. But like if you were to steelman another company, whether it's one of the Mag 7, whether it's one of the Frontier Labs, which one would it be and why?
It's a good question. I thought a reasonable amount about this, and part of my worldview keeps coming back to like Google's the best company in the entire world. So I'll take that position at the same time that I think like one of the interesting things has been how expansionary some of these markets are. If you look at like what's happened for Anthropic as an example, who's been able to like dramatically grow their business in a category where from a model provider standpoint, everyone is trying to hill climb on code quality. So like intuitively, you're like, oh, there's only $10 billion available in the code market. As Gemini gets better and as the OpenAI models get better and as XAI and et cetera get better, it sort of eats into the Anthropic overall revenue and market share, which has turned out to not be true. Like at the same time, I think I was listening to Dario's talk at DealBook or whatever it was, and like Anthropic's revenue is growing 10x year over year. I'm sure the same thing is true for OpenAI. I don't know what the public numbers are that we've shared for Google, but revenue is growing and users and all that stuff is growing incredibly strong. So it's so fascinating to see how expansionary it is. And I think it makes it actually really hard to answer this question in like a pointed way because the market is not stable. I think as you look at some of the, like, it'd be much easier to make a bunch of guesses if like you were looking at a fixed market size and you could sort of see the trajectory that folks are on. But I think fundamentally all these markets are growing so quickly. And I think code is one particularly where like, I think it has room to run maybe another 10 to 20x what it is now as more and more people like the creation of software is democratized and everyone is creating software, and the form factor of like using the internet becomes this dynamic software creation engine for you, where historically you were consuming software that other people made on your made for you. So it'll be interesting to see that happen. And I think maybe to distill down my long-winded answer to your question, I think there's a lot of room in the market for lots of companies doing different stuff. And I think that's actually what we'll see is like all of these companies have a place. There's huge economic outcome opportunities for everyone. And ultimately, like there'll be lots of competition as well, which is great for developers and consumers and stuff like that. So I think it's a great ecosystem to be building in right now.
So
Okay. Go ahead, Nick.
yeah, I was just going to add to this. You've touched on a lot of reasons why Google is well positioned here. In a lot of ways, it feels like it's Google's race to lose. We've talked about the front door of the internet. You have multiple products with multiple billions of users using them. That's great distribution that really doesn't exist anywhere else. And then you have, of course, this self-funding flywheel where you're able to fund your AI endeavors through other revenue generated by other Google properties, where Anthropic and OpenAI don't have that luxury. You're able to sidestep the NVIDIA tax because you have your own TPUs. Like there's all these advantages. Are there any advantages that maybe I haven't listed or we haven't talked about that might not seem obvious, but it definitely exist?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one that I think about a lot just because it's like very close to my world now in Deepmind is this like breadth of research that's taking place. I think there's obviously LLMs are incredibly important and useful and working for a lot of use cases and generating tons of economic value for the world and all that stuff. But I think Demis has talked about this before. Like it's clear that they continue to make like very crucial mistakes on things that you would, if for like a generally intelligent system, wouldn't expect them to make. And I think the hypothesis is like you probably need another couple of breakthroughs in order to get to a place where these systems are sort of generally intelligent and not just like narrow intelligence, which I think we actually have. Like it's actually somewhat, at least my personal opinion is it's somewhat clear like we could scale LLMs to narrow intelligence in a bunch of different domains and it would be extremely economically valuable. And I think we're actually already doing that today. Like the success in coding is one example of this. But I think this is where the like breadth of research that's happening at DeepMind and specifically outside just the bounds of like LLMs and this historically like zeitgeist type of AI model creation. So there's tons of like long-term research bets that are happening. And again, if you pull back to what got Google to the place that it's in right now, it's making a bunch of these long-term research bets, like building the type of research lab Jeff and others at Google Brain did in order for the transformer to be created, and sort of the TPU and all this other foundational work that happened in the ecosystem across Google through the last 10 years. The level of investment that's happening to continue that type of like future facing really broad breadth of research, I think gets me really excited. And to do that to have innovation at scale like that is actually not easy to do, because it just requires a lot of resources, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of sort of like human capital in order to do things like that. And I think Google's continued to make that investment. So it gets me excited about like future innovations, hopefully coming from us, to push the ecosystem forward.
Logan, when you think about which industries have been majorly impacted by artificial intelligence, obviously you talked about coding and programming as a career, and obviously the software development landscape has completely transformed over the last couple of years, but it isn't necessarily being seen in other areas of the economy quite yet. There's been some discussion about that this week. Do you think that is a reflection of model quality? As you said, there needs to be another couple breakthroughs, or do you think that's maybe a lag on implementation on the enterprise side?
Yeah, my guess is the dirty answer to this is it's probably a little bit of both, honestly. Like I think it's code quality has historically, I think, not been easier to hill climb, but like it is a little bit, it's a domain that is exponential. You sort of like have, it's a domain that like researchers understand. It's like there's all these like things that make it so that it's easier to potentially hill climb quality there versus in other areas. And it's a domain in which there's like very salient economic opportunity. So I think there's some of these long tail use cases where like, and I think one of these is like healthcare. Could AI be exceptionally impactful in healthcare? Yes. Is it already impactful in healthcare? Yes. Is it LLMs, like perhaps slightly less LLM focused, and there's tons of other implementations of AI in that ecosystem? Is it easy to now like actually like reimagine that experience? Like, is our healthcare professionals, is the sort of legislative regulatory bodies just like willing to like adapt and innovate very quickly? The answer is no, and for good reasons in a lot of these cases. And I think if you look at software development, it's like the complete opposite end of the spectrum, where like developers are willing to try new things, companies are willing to invest to try to increase the speed of innovation and software creation. So I think we'll continue actually to see that, which is like areas that are willing to adopt and be on the edge and the frontier. You'll see more model progress there just because of this whole like flywheel of feedback and progress happening hand in hand. And I think for some of these other ecosystems, you might actually have like more specialized bets that are happening. Like there's tons of companies that are going after like just AI and healthcare, other domains like that that are sort of less able to like be on this frontier path. So I think it's interesting. Like, it's not actually clear to me yet, like what the next one is beyond code. I think in some weird ways, like code will just continue to like permeate as a multiplier effect into like ways that we don't think about code today, which will be kind of cool to see, but also, yeah, interesting to know what the next one of those is going to be.
Yeah. All right. Well, Logan, we couldn't have you on the show without asking you this question. We got to talk about AGI. So Sam came out recently saying March 2028. Over the last few months,
That's
are you becoming
very specific? March 2028.
It was
Isn't it
actually
specific?
quite specific. Yeah.
I'm expecting a similar answer. Have you become
30-day window?
Yeah, more or less bullish on a quick timeline for AGI?
It's a good question. I think the problem with the AGI question, and again, also a lot of it just depends on what your definition is. I think that like architecture piece matters a lot, which is like if you want to have a generally intelligent system that like doesn't make the mistakes that current LLM architecture models make, you need a bunch of research breakthroughs. And the challenge is like, or maybe Sam has the ability to put a timeline on research breakthroughs, but usually by default, like you can't put a timeline on research breakthroughs. You just don't know. Like it could be 5 years before anyone figures out like what's that thing that actually unlocks this next paradigm. It could be much sooner. I think there's lots of things that people are trying. If I had to put my finger on it, like I would guess we continue to have like more narrowly intelligent models that actually in a lot of ways sort of feel like maybe there ends up not being a distinction between these two things. But I think you'll get product experiences that sort of blow people's minds in ways that like you wouldn't expect today. I think the fundamental question will be like, are they generally intelligent? And that's the part that I'm less compelled by. But I could imagine like one of the things that happens by 2028 is that like all of coding is solved. Like you could just at will spin up any amount of code that you want. That seems more plausible to me than like we have a system that can then do anything. So we'll see. I think that's where my head's at. And the interesting thing is, even if you have that narrowly intelligent thing and it's like incredibly salient, I think there'll be lots of people who are like, oh, that thing is so good, it must be AGI. So I think it'll get even more murky as the like narrow intelligence keeps going up in all these like vertical domains and how people reflect back on like the broad general intelligence base. So.
Okay. And so are you going to give us a month for that 2028?
No month. I think this is also as you become like, I'm just trying to enjoy the moment these days.
I like that approach.
Like who knows, it's not useful, at least in my role, to like future guess what's going to happen.
Well, actually, let me ask you a slightly different version of that question. As you think about like the next 5 years at Google, do you expect there to be meaningful but iterative improvements to the models? Or do you expect there to be these significant, meaningful breakthroughs that kind of change how we fundamentally interact with this technology?
Yeah, I'm hopeful for like fundamental breakthroughs. I think regardless of whether we get fundamental breakthroughs, you'll see iterative progress. Like I think it's actually like clear to a certain extent how to continue to iterate on the existing LLM infrastructure and like the scale it up and do all these other things. So we will for sure see that, like hopefully at a minimum. Um, and then I think like, and again, if you think back to what was happening 5 years ago versus what's happening today, like there's been a huge amount of breakthroughs and innovation that's happened. So my assumption is that will continue to also happen, and we will see some like disruption of the way that we do things. I also think we'll see product experiences become more part of this story. Like I think people look at AGI and sort of some of these concepts today through this lens of like it is a model and it's like some weights on a system somewhere. And I think what we'll see more is product experiences embodying this, and what happens when you take personal context and you take all these tools and you bring it together. And I have a tweet that I put out a while ago about this, but like my guess is that actually becomes the AGI experience. It's not, it will be some like super powerful AI model, but like, it's maybe Gemini 3 is not good enough of a model yet, but like it's plausible to me that somebody takes an off the shelf model, puts all the rest of the stuff together, packages it in a way that like you as a user are like, holy crap, this thing actually is generally intelligent and useful in every facet of my life. And that becomes the AGI moment for people. But it wasn't just the model. Principally, it was this whole system that's built around it. So I think we'll see sort of the arms race in that world as well, of who can build that system that actually brings the model to life. And you kind of see this in coding right now, which is like you take the model right out of the box, you put it in all these different coding environments, and there's actually substantive differences in like the way the model acts and how successful it is at different tasks, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we'll see that continue to play out. And I think we're measuring it on code right now. And I think we'll start to measure it in other domains as well.
Logan, last question for you. Pre-training, scaling, some talk about it hitting the wall. It doesn't sound like you believe that. Doesn't sound like Google believes that. Just clarify that for me.
Yeah, it's not whether or not you believe it, it's whether or not it's true. And I think the truth is pre-training continues to deliver real gains. And the most important part is that the gains again that you see in pre-training, even if like the exponential is like slightly shallower than it was before, where we were like in the early days of scaling up, principally every other step in the model development process is an amplification of the underlying pre-trained model. So if you have a beast of a pre-trained model, and even if you're only eking out a couple of percentage points increases in like overall capability during pre-training, the other steps of the process amplify and are exponential on top of that. So as long as you can keep making a couple of percentage points, you'll see the other steps of the process amplify. And that goes like the whole stack all the way up to the product experience, actually. So it is, it's a great time to be doing pre-training still.
Logan, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. You're welcome back anytime. Google.com, AI Studio, find them on X, official Logan K. We'll drop all of that in the chat. Logan, thank you so much.
Thank you both. Bye.
See ya.
Thank you, Logan. Always fun to talk to that guy.
I love that you're trying to pin him down on the exact month, like Sam Altman.
So annoying. I really shouldn't do that. It's a bad interviewer practice.
No, I love it. Okay, so we have our next guest ready, and I think we just bring him right on.
Yeah. So up next, we have Joe Floyd, who is a general partner at Emergence Capital, where he's been for the last 12 years, investing in companies like Zoom, Box, Salesforce, Together AI, Bolt, and many, many others. Joe, welcome to Forward Future Live.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Of course.
Hey, Joe.
It's great to see you.
Good to see you.
So actually, real quick, I'm sorry,
Please.
but we got to get the most important question out of the way first. And that is, you played poker with Matt earlier this week. I want to know how much money you took off of him.
I didn't know he was going to bring this up, Joe.
That's a fair question. It's bad form for the VC to talk about taking money from the founders. So I'll just say that we both did all right.
All right.
That's
Very fair answer.
So Joe, when we were at poker, you brought up this interesting thought experiment that you've been going through, and I would love to go through it with you. You mentioned what happens if OpenAI and or Anthropic just fail, right? Obviously, extremely well-funded companies, Anthropic doing very well on the revenue side. But like, let's go through that thought experiment. What happens to the VC landscape? What happens to the overall AI landscape?
Yeah, I mean, people forget that it was only like 18 months ago that OpenAI basically failed for a weekend and then came back. It was almost like that SVB crisis where everyone freaked out for a weekend and then magically everything was fine on Monday. Um, yeah, I mean, if that happens, just imagine how much capital has been deployed into those two companies and the ripple effects of if all those venture firms essentially get a goose egg, what that does to their returns and what that does to their viability as a venture firm going forward. People have plowed more money into these two private companies than pretty much any other private companies in history.
Okay, and then
So what? Yeah, do you think that we're talking like VCs are going out of business? Are we talking, what's the collateral damage here?
Yeah, I mean there will definitely be multiple funds that don't raise future funds. And so you know that is going to be the case regardless. I think there's going to be a shakeout at some point, but you've got really big brand names that may be caught up in that if those two companies were to disappear.
And then what are the second order effects on startups in general? Obviously, if a bunch of VCs go belly up, it's going to affect the startup ecosystem. It's going to affect Silicon Valley. It's really going to affect America. So like walk us through those last second order effects.
Yeah, I mean this is something that I've been thinking about. I don't have a crystal ball with the exact answers, but the way I think about it is when a venture firm goes under, there's a bunch of orphaned companies as well. And so sometimes partners will stay on and they'll actually manage those companies, but they don't really have an incentive to. So a lot of those people, particularly if they had decent track records and were kind of caught up in by other factors, they'll join other venture firms or they'll go start their own firms, which means you'll have a lot of orphaned companies that won't have future financings necessarily and won't have proper guidance. So it just winds up being a ripple effect throughout the ecosystem. Plus, you just have the natural one of if a couple big luminary type companies fail, other companies that may look like them that have benefited from tailwinds will also be under a lot of scrutiny and may not fundraise as much money.
All right. So I want to talk about software as a service. Emergence has made some incredible bets over the last couple decades in software companies, specifically software as a service companies. And a lot of people are talking about how the SaaS industry is going to be or is already affected by AI. The fact that, anybody can build or vibe code things very quickly. What are you seeing from the VC side of things? What are you seeing in the SaaS market now? And then what is your prediction over the next 12 to 18 months?
I mean, we're already seeing the impact. So if you imagine that AI can generate any code faster, better, cheaper, then the natural impact is that you'll have 10 to 12 companies that all see the same opportunity at the same time, and those founders can spin up MVPs faster than ever, and they'll wind up initially having incredibly fast growth, and then they'll start to compete with each other, and then there'll be this what we call the race to the bottom, where gross margins start getting impacted, prices start going down, and eventually that market that was attractive initially may not be so attractive. And I think you might see that play out in any type of software that doesn't really have moats. So if you think about the golden era of SaaS was sort of 2009 to 2015. And that's when you had, the Workdays of the world, ServiceNow, Viva Systems, these types of really iconic companies going public. But in many of those situations, they really didn't have any competition. I don't think you can find a category now that you might consider traditional software that isn't going to have 10 fast followers, ten competitors all competing. So I think that's going to have a huge impact on software and then venture investors who invest in software.
And so you don't think that the real threat is companies actually building their own bespoke software for what they need? It's actually just for every one company, there are 20 other competitors.
I think that they will both have impact, but I think the thing that you just mentioned, the latter, like I don't imagine that General Electric's going to build their own ERP and they're going to like vibe code their own CRM. Like that may happen many years down the road, but right now the tech isn't there. You don't have all the integrations, you don't have all the custom workflows. Like it would be a lot of work to do that. And people want, this is probably not a PC phrase, but people want a throat to choke. Like they want a vendor to go after to make it right. And if it's kind of your own internal team, that's a little bit harder. So I think about it more as the software ecosystem will simply not have the same, home run returns that it has had in the past, sort of in compared to that golden era of 10, 15 years ago.
Are you
Just playing
seeing
this. Yeah, go ahead.
one last question on this? Are you seeing price compression on or I guess there was like this kind of cultural shift of kind of really disliking per seat pricing, but are you also seeing on top of that pricing compression because there's so much more software, because there's so many more competitors in each vertical?
Yeah, you start to see it over time. Like initially, when companies first launch, there's so much green field that they're not running into each other enough. And it's really as they start to scale that they start to compete for the same keywords. They start to have, all their SDRs reaching out to the same customers. Those same customers are now realizing that there are 3 or 4 alternatives that can suit their needs, and then they're running processes. So initially in that kind of 0 to 10 phase, you don't see a lot of that compression. You start to see it a lot in the 50 to 100 phase.
Hmm.
And so a lot of these AI startups haven't actually hit that yet. In fact, many of them haven't hit renewal cycles yet. So we don't actually know what it's going to be like, how their gross margins are going to be, and how their retention is going to be long term.
It's a good reminder of just how incredibly early we are in all of this.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Logan Kilpatrick, who was just on the show, he was predicting that by 2028, you can just blink and have whatever code generated you need. And so what you're saying completely makes sense, and I generally agree. But to play devil's advocate for a second, I wonder if just the competitive differentiation shifts from how quickly a team can develop MVPs or production ready products to how good their distribution is or how well they understand their customer and their target market. Is that possible that you still end up with a very healthy competitive market and winners emerge for different reasons?
Yeah, but the question becomes how big are those winners going to be? Like, do they all wind up getting a niche focus where they're like the best CRM, but for golf courses, right? And then that winds up not being the types of 50 billion, $200 billion type exits that ServiceNow and Salesforce were. And then if you play that back for the venture ecosystem, if you're investing in these early stage companies at 100 times ARR, you need 10 billion plus exits in order for it to make sense. But if those exits don't materialize because everybody's focused on narrow niches, then maybe it doesn't work for the ecosystem.
Got it. So the
I mean,
ecosystem changes, but potentially you have a founder who has a CRM for golf courses, and that team is only 3 people because they're able to do so much more with so much less.
Yeah.
And so it's good for them, but not good for the old ecosystem.
It can be a hole in one for them. I don't know. I don't know if it would be for the whole ecosystem.
good
Nice.
analogy.
Nice.
So you're hearing a lot about, maybe the first solo entrepreneur hitting 1 billion. And so, yeah, it seems like it's getting more spread out, and certainly that will affect kind of traditional VC math. Do you see, obviously speak for Emergence, but more broadly, these funds and the fund structures changing over the next few years? Is there a math that can work and still have the returns that VCs promise to give?
Yeah, I mean, venture's evolving, and this hasn't really fully played out yet, but you're seeing basically a bimodal distribution in venture where either you are a specialist who has a smaller fund and you're getting in early, you're seeing that trend before other people, and therefore you're getting paid for it if it works out, or you're kind of accumulating capital and you're becoming an asset allocator and you're raising tens of billions of dollars. Those are the brand names that you've heard of, and they are simply trying to have a venture, cover the ecosystem of venture and hopefully generate a 2x return. And so you're seeing those kind of two strategies play out. I think what you're also seeing is people move away from, call it pure software, and maybe I'll speak to Emergence. For the first 20 years, we were really focused exclusively on enterprise software. And I think over the last 5, 7 years, we've started to shift and say, okay, well, maybe we should focus also on things that are where it's an emerging business model. It doesn't necessarily have to be software. We're really good at figuring out the early days of those trends and those shifts. And we need to focus on things that have real defensibility. So you could argue going a little bit from software, which doesn't really have any defensibility, to kind of deeper tech. And that can look like a foundation model, or it can look like, a network effects business. So just different twists, but not just betting on pure software applications.
As the enterprise software market drastically changes, especially, over the last couple of years, but certainly over the next few years. What does Emergence look for? What are those early signals that you're looking for nowadays in a business that you think can be enormous?
I mean, number one is always team. We always joke it's team, team, and TAM. So you're initially you're looking for is this team consistent of people who have just won at every level in their life, right? Number two, you're looking for are they doing something really hard? Like, is there something defensible about what they're doing? Did they develop something novel? And I've got plenty of examples in the portfolio. And then the third one you're looking for is there market pull? Like, is there the sucking sound of customers demanding their product and them almost being succeeding in spite of themselves and being unwilling, like unable to fill this incredible amount of demand? And so if you find those three things, you've got a winner.
What are you seeing?
I mean, right now, the obvious answer to all three of these has been in AI infrastructure. I mean, for the last 2 years, it's just been an incredible amount of market pull. And if you can back great teams going after that space, there's just been absolute rocket ships.
Is that the hardware layer? Obviously, that there's a big kind of time lag there. Is that the model layer? Is that the rollout, the applications? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all of the above. I think everything that's been related to people um, fulfilling the ability of inference in in AI, everyone in that entire value chain is seeing incredible market pull.
So it feels like the AI bubble fears have dissipated a little bit over the last week. What's your perspective on all of that? Do you think we're in one, or
I, I,
one is
I don't think
impending?
I don't think a bubble can form or disappear in a week. So it's kind of funny
Yeah.
how quickly the wind shifts. Um, I don't like the bubble analogy, and it's not just me talking my own book. Um, I think about it as we're on an upward trajectory, and there's going to be bumps and bruises along the way. And so if things correct 20-30%, it's just a natural thing and it's a good thing for the ecosystem. It's almost like a wildfire. Like a wildfire just clears out the brush in a forest, and then everything that survives can grow taller.
Mhm.
Um, I look back to 99. I actually went back down a rabbit hole. And a lot of those businesses just didn't have sound fundamentals. And you could argue that a lot of the businesses that we're looking at now do. And so it's like real revenue, real value creation. Yes, there may be a 20 or 30% correction, and that may be a good thing.
Yeah. So these headlines, which are kind of, I don't know, fear mongering in some ways, get a lot of attention, but you don't think they're substantiated based on what you're seeing these companies with
It's
these
just a
companies.
it just depends on how people have like made the word bubble have all these negative connotations, right? Are we overvaluing companies? Yes. Like you can argue based on the top five companies being all tech companies and trading at whatever 30 times PE, like that is absolutely overvalued. But are they creating value? Like, will there be value created over the next 10 years? I absolutely believe so. So it's just a question of pricing. And so whether we're off by 20%, that's not for me to say. Um, but I absolutely think that we're going to continue up and to the right over the next 5 years.
And Joe, we seem to have this delineation, companies that were created pre-ChatGPT, pre-2022, and then companies that were created post-2022, AI native companies.
Yeah.
And we were talking the other night about which companies become supercharged by artificial intelligence. How do you think about that? Are the companies that were pre-2022, are they kind of just bolting on AI? What does that actually look like?
Yeah, it's tough. Obviously we've got over 100 portfolio companies, and so a lot of them are pre-AI native. Um, and there's a clear delineation for them. The ones that are really harnessing AI have taken a burn the boat strategy. And so in many cases,
Mm.
they've shut down old products and built them brand new from the ground up. They've hired, new teams that only focus on how do I infuse AI throughout the organization. And in many cases, they have also had to let go of sometimes upwards of 50% of their staff in order to kind of make this transition. Um, the companies who have basically tried to be incremental about it and say, hey, I'm just going to add an AI feature, or I'm just going to, use Cursor for my for my engineering team and call myself AI. Like most of those companies aren't making this shift. And so they've kind of missed the wave.
For companies that are having to let go of 50% of the organization, that is not because they all of a sudden are hugely increasingly productive. That is because their entire strategy as a company has changed.
Most of the time, it's because growth basically hit a wall. They started flatlining, but they had the burn associated with being a high growth startup. And people forget, 2022 was this era of zero interest rates, demand was pulled forward. And so a lot of these companies saw incredible growth during that time period. And then in 2023, especially the second half of 2023, and then all of 2024, demand really, really stopped as as software buyers really tightened their belts. And so then you had that mismatch of burn being really high and growth flatlining. And so those companies had to make a hard call. And in many cases, they went through layoffs and tried to get to cash flow break even. And a large part of that is because they couldn't raise more money. And they couldn't raise more money because during that zero interest rate period, they got valuations at too high of a mark. And it's really hard to reset the value of a company, especially if you've raised at multi-billion-dollar valuations and you've raised hundreds of millions of dollars.
And we're having a repeat of that almost with the current swath of AI companies, right?
Yeah, we don't really learn, do we?
Not in
I,
Silicon Valley, we do not.
yeah, we're definitely seeing a recurrence of some of the bad behavior that permeated the ecosystem in 2021. We're seeing deals getting done at, 30 to 100 times ARR for startups that have only been around for 12, 18 months. We're seeing a lot of this betting on early signs of growth, but not knowing the full retention picture. So will it end poorly? For some companies, it absolutely will, and for some investors, it absolutely will. And you know, as Warren Buffett said, you find out who's swimming naked when the tide rolls back.
But then, as emergence, you have to look at these companies, and some of them are going to be enormous. And do you just not play that game?
Yeah, I mean, the only true defense that investors have is time diversification. So if you invest your fund over a 3.5, 4 year time frame, you'll catch highs and lows in the macro. And so you might wind up investing in some things at the peak, but hopefully you'll also get some bargains. When a firm invests their entire thing, their entire fund in 6 or 12 months, and then goes back to the market, like that fund can be a complete home run or it can be a complete goose egg depending on some of that macro. So you have to invest. That's what LPs are giving, investors money to do. The best thing you can do is just do it over enough time that you get diversification.
So shifting gears just a little bit, I believe I've read that you think of generative AI in go-to-market as being pretty underwhelming at this point. And is that because of the expectation? Like a sales team or a marketing team thinks that they can just plug in AI to see results. And so is it about how they're implementing it, or is it about the tools themselves? Do they just need to re-architect everything from the ground up? How are you viewing that?
I don't know if I'd say it's underwhelming like holistically. I think if people don't, the teams that are doing the best with Gen AI and go to market are incredibly curious, and they are fine-tuning every part of their process and basically starting from scratch and redoing every part of their process. And some are having incredible results. I think people who expect like, oh, I'm just going to use ChatGPT to rewrite my blog posts and I'm just going to have, you know, a Gemini model create new ads and it's just suddenly going to work better. I think they're kind of missing the picture. There is no like silver bullet that just makes it easy. It's the companies that are doing the best are the ones that are just like obsessive and curious and in many cases, like they're building their go-to-market strategies from zero again. We've had companies lay off their entire go-to-market teams and restart them and have had good success. It's the ones that try to like incrementally change something and just say, oh, I'm going to bolt this on and fix this one problem. It doesn't really move the needle.
So in those examples where an entire team is let go, what kind of profiles are those companies looking for to hire?
Yeah, generally, it's people who have that intense curiosity. Like you want to hire the person who's going to spend their weekend playing with the latest new AI tool, not because you told them to, but because they just want to. And they're going to come in on Monday and be like, "Hey guys, this is what I built, and let's like roll it out and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, we're going to change it." And so I think it's finding people who are insanely curious, and who are willing to experiment quickly and then switch if it's not working.
Yeah.
So it you aren't allowed to tell people to hire younger. That is not what I'm saying, but it does tend to like skew towards curiosity.
Interesting.
Last question for you, Joe. Tons of entrepreneurs moving to San Francisco, Silicon Valley more broadly right now. They're starting companies. They're really excited to dabble and create real value with artificial intelligence. You, as a VC, looking at who to bet on, what is advice that you would give a fresh entrepreneur, or at least building a new company in this new AI era?
Hmm. That's a great question. I mean, the first piece of advice is stop waiting and move here and do it. Um, like I think the world is moving so fast that if you wait to finish college or you wait for the perfect time in your life and you're planning on moving here in 6 or 12 months, you may have already missed your window. So the first bit of advice would be just move and do it. Um, the second piece would probably be there is just so much opportunity, being willing to rethink everything from first principles, and go after the biggest opportunities. Like now is the time.
So firm believer that you have to be in San Francisco if you're going to do this right.
I'm super biased, and I know you're moving here, so you'll feel it too. But it's I'm extremely biased. I feel like there's nothing that can replace the serendipity of being here and running into people and having that
Yeah.
kind of um, coincidental like inspiration. And then the second piece is I've never seen another ecosystem that is as giving as Silicon Valley. Like the fact that you can reach out to someone and get 30 minutes of their time, that might unlock something in your thinking or in your idea. That doesn't exist in other ecosystems in the same way. And so for those two reasons, I'm just incredibly biased.
Well, Joe, I really appreciate you joining us today. I appreciate you not cleaning me out the other night. If you are an incredible entrepreneur, mcap.com, Emergence Capital, check them out on Twitter, Emergence Cap on Twitter. So, Joe, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Appreciate your
guys.
time. Come
See ya.
back.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
San Francisco.
you broke even, right? Is that what I heard?
Yeah, that's right. I did break
Okay.
even. Next
Pretty
time, I'm
good.
going to clean everybody else out.
Pretty good for 7 hours. ROI
Yeah.
positive.
We had good conversation. That is what matters.
Yeah, right. All right.
Very good
Well,
for 7 hours.
for our final guest, we have Guy Gurari, co-founder of Augment Code. Guy has a PhD in physics and spent years at the Institute for Advanced Study, where, fun fact, Einstein worked. He then worked as a research scientist focused on large language models at Google and would go on to co-found Augment in 2022. Guy, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, great to be here.
Yeah, how you doing
Hey.
today?
Very good, very good. Good to see you again.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
good
too.
to see you again.
Yeah, friend of the show, a repeat appearance here. Starting things off, let's just start with something basic. Tell us a little bit about what Augment is for those that don't know, and how it got started.
Yeah, so Augment builds the best coding agents for professional software teams. Our focus is to build agents that really understand large, messy code bases, which is typically the kind of code base that a professional software team needs to deal with. And so through our own secret sauce, we surface that context. We surface the context by providing the agent with a way to search the code base. And we search it in real time. We keep the index up to date. And what that boils down to at the end is an agent that doesn't need a lot of handholding. You can ask it high-level questions. You can tell it to implement features in a fairly high-level language. And more often than not, it will go and figure out how to do it. Maybe you need some steering, but overall, it needs a whole lot less steering than other agents that are out there. And this was our premise from the beginning. So when we started, our bet was that models are just going to get better and better, but the results you get out of AI models are only as good as the context you give them. And so that's what we've invested a whole lot of research work and engineering work kind of perfecting in terms of our solution.
Guy, you were pretty explicit in saying you serve professional software teams. And that really means not vibe coders. Is that right? And if so, why?
So I would distinguish professional software teams from teams that do more, or individuals that do more 0 to 1 software development. So if you're doing 0 to 1, you're typically dealing with a fairly small code base. It starts from nothing, or it starts from something that's pretty small, and then it grows to be maybe pretty quickly. You can get these days to like tens of thousands of lines of code where you start seeing like meaningful differences. But at least in the beginning, there's not a lot of context that you can give the agent. And so when you're dealing with such small code bases, I think you're going to get like very similar results no matter what agent you're using. But that's not the situation for most professional software teams. These are teams that are dealing with code bases that are typically in the millions of lines of code or more. And that's where having agents that can only do things like read files and grep through code bases becomes a limitation, and you're not getting the full value you can out of your models. Now, on vibe coding versus not vibe coding, you can use our agent however you like. We have found that it is a very good idea to supervise what the agent is doing. So I think usually when people say vibe coding, they will mean that you let the agent do whatever it wants and you maybe check in your code without even looking at it, just making sure that it works. And that's a pretty sure way of getting yourself into trouble because agents are still making fairly bad design and architecture decisions all the time. And so if you're really not supervising what the agent is doing, you're going to get yourself into trouble with a code base that's really just hard to maintain. So our recommendation is to do what I think is starting to be called more vibe engineering, which means that, yeah, let the agent write all the code, but closely supervise the decisions that it's making and steer it when it's making decisions that are not to your liking.
And so, Guy, I'm trying to envision the workflow. I haven't worked on a large professional software engineering team in my life. I've done a ton of vibe coding, a ton of solo projects. Like, what does the actual workflow look like? You said that you're letting AI write the entire feature. You're obviously needing to review it in full, make sure it is right, make sure you're not deploying slop. So yeah, walk through that workflow if I'm an engineer. How do I get code to production using Augment?
Hmm. So I think I can describe how I work with these agents. And so it typically starts with, and let's take the more extreme example where I'm trying to build a feature touching a part of the code base that I'm not even familiar with, right? Let's say I'm completely new to that part of the code base. I will often start by having a brainstorming session with the agent, first trying to understand that part of the code and how it works by talking to the agent and having it use our context engine to kind of surface the relevant pieces of code and give me answers. Then start coming up with an initial plan for the feature. I will ask it like, okay, I want to implement this and that feature, suggest a plan for doing it. Often we will together write that plan down in a spec, like a markdown file, and iterate on the spec until I'm happy with all the decisions that were made there. So the spec would include the motivation, but also are we adding any interfaces? Are we changing any protocols? Which pieces of the code are we touching? What tests are we going to be writing? That's all before we wrote like a single line of code. Once that's in place, I will have the agent go and implement the spec. And then typically what happens is very quickly, the agent will run into issues that we didn't consider in our brainstorming because code is complex and it's really hard to predict things beforehand. And at that point, I will try to guide it to get to an initial end-to-end working solution as quickly as possible, and then iterate from that solution by solving whatever problems show up. And the way that works is the agent will write the code. I will always try to give it feedback that's as automatic as possible. So that means either getting it to compile the code, giving it feedback from linters, having it write tests and run them. Because once it does that and it gets all those tests to pass, I at least know we're talking about code that at least on the surface works, that it's not like total slop. When we get to that, then I will review what it did. I will see if there are any design decisions that I would have done differently, because those you cannot catch with tests, right? Then we would address them by iterating. And then once that's all done and I've tested the solution myself and I see that it works and the design looks good, I will open a PR and have another team member review it. So that's my very typical workflow. And then Once I get reviews on the PR, I will have the agent address the comments from the reviewers as well. So I will just tell it, oh, I opened a PR. There's some comments in there. Why don't you go and address them? And then it will fix the code, update the PR, and also respond on its own to the reviewers.
Makes a lot of sense. Interesting. So I want to talk about latency in this process. So obviously speed, response time is really important when you're coding. But what's the difference between, obviously there's a huge difference between a second and 2 milliseconds, but is there a substantial difference in terms of the experience of the coder when it's a difference of 4 milliseconds and 400 milliseconds and 200 milliseconds?
Yeah, so that's a super interesting question. So I would break latency down to two different numbers. The first number is something that it's not exactly time to first token, but it's something like, I would call it time to sanity check. Like if I give the agent an instruction, it will start rattling off with chain of thought, start making some tool calls. I want to know that it's on the right track, more or less, that it's not like going off the rails before I will leave it alone and like let it go for a while. So this time to sanity check is it's probably the most important number from what I've seen. So to give you an example, if you have a model like Sonnet, Sonnet gets to that point pretty quickly. A model like GPT-5, for example, or 5.1, it typically takes longer to get to that point. And we've seen, because it has more thinking tokens and it takes its time a bit more. And that really matters from what we've seen for developers. The other number is just the time to complete the whole agentic trajectory. Like I'm giving it a user message, it starts doing stuff, it runs tests, it edits the code. That can take a while. That can take 10 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes longer. As far as I can tell, that time is less meaningful than this initial time of seeing that the agent is going in the right direction. So we focus a lot on this first number, this first latency, and there, I don't know if it's not measured in hundreds of milliseconds. It's more measured in like, is it taking seconds? Like, is it taking like up to 10 seconds, or is it taking a minute? A minute for that would be like too long. I think developers don't want to wait that long to see that their agent is going in the right direction.
Guy, you obviously have seen that the entire software industry has changed over the last few years, just enormous economic impact. And we talked about this with a couple of our previous guests. Why do you think we aren't seeing that level of economic impact in other areas of the economy from AI, obviously?
From AI compared to software engineering?
Yeah.
Yes. I think the answer to that is that software engineering is the first domain where we've been able to close the loop with agents without humans being in the loop. And what I mean by that is with code, there's a lot of automated feedback that we can give the agents as they're working so that they can automatically get to a decent solution without any human involvement. It's the thing I mentioned before. So it means, so for example, in Augment, if you're using it in your IDE, when the agent edits code, we will automatically have whatever linters or whatever type checkers and so on you have configured, we will have them run. And as the agent is editing the code, we will provide that feedback to the agent. So if it messed up some types or if it messed up some linting rules, we will tell the agent that so that on the next turn, it will just automatically fix those problems. And same goes for unit tests. The agent is able to write tests and then run them. And then if they don't work, it will continue iterating. And what that does, that makes a huge difference in terms of the quality of code that you get compared to not having it. And I really believe that the reason things are taking off with code is the fact that we can close this loop and let the agent work until it gets to correct code on its own. And I think what's happened is that code is just the first domain where this happened because it's the domain where it's easiest to do. Code is built to be executed. And so it's very easy in a sense, or easier than in other domains to provide that feedback back to the agent. Now, of course, the models have to be trained to make use of that feedback. And the first model that was really good at that was Sonnet 3.5. And that's, I mean, not by coincidence, that was the first model where we had like really wonderful, delightful agents that started writing a lot of the code start happening. I think it'll be interesting to see what will be the next domain that will be able to close that loop, because I think that is really the difference between code and every other domain out there. You
Yeah,
can
and
call it, oh, sorry.
no, I was going to say, and it sounds like when you're just saying close the loop and how you're describing it, it really sounds like, or at least akin to reinforcement learning with verifiable rewards. The verifiable rewards part, code is perfect for that. You know, if it executes, you know, if there's a problem, what the problem was and how to, or, you know, it'll figure out how to fix it. Other domains, many other domains do not have that. So how do we solve that?
Yeah, that's right. So it's a really hard and interesting problem. And I would also clarify that, yes, there is the reinforcement learning with verifiable rewards, which is on the training side. And then what you see on the inference side is that, you know, you train the model to do as well as it can on the first try, but because you have these rewards also coming in when you actually run the agent during inference, um, the agent can continue. It's almost as if the agent is hill climbing on the reward during inference time. Like it doesn't have to nail the answer on the first try. It
Right.
can get something on the first try and then get the feedback during inference from the tests, let's say, and then continue iterating until it works. Um, I don't know what the answer is for domains that really cannot have this level of feedback. One attempt to get around this is reasoning, right? Like all the thinking tokens that models have, I think of them as an attempt to let the model kind of provide feedback for itself in lieu of like real world feedback. Um, I don't know what you do in domains that don't have that. To me, the question is, what is the next domain that does have this property where it's maybe harder to get at than code, but where it's still possible to get at it? So to give you an example, I don't know if it's very economically impactful, but in math, you also have this property. You can give the model feedback through writing down your theorem in a formal language and then running it through a theorem prover, right? And then you can let the model iterate on that. So there are other domains where this is possible. Again, my guess is that the next big impactful leap is going to come from unlocking another domain where this can happen. I think scientific experimentation is perhaps another domain like that. The issue there is that the iteration loop is a lot slower. If I had to bet on one domain, I would bet on cybersecurity, because I think that's a domain where you can get feedback from your experiments. Like, did you actually find a vulnerability? Are you able to exploit a vulnerability? That to me seems like a domain that's kind of ripe for disruption from AI because of
And
this.
have you not seen the same kind of disruption yet in the cybersecurity realm? I mean, I feel like it's kind of running in parallel to software development, but what are you seeing?
I I have not. Of course, there are a lot of there's a lot of work, of course, to get AI into cybersecurity. We're seeing that too at the level of, I mean, the simplest thing is like when you're reviewing code, you want to use AI to scan for vulnerabilities in a way that's like better than before. Even when the agents are writing the code, you can sort of shift left that process of looking for vulnerabilities and kind of check the code that agents are writing as they're writing it. That's all happening. Um, but that's still not the same as well, I guess I would separate that, like scanning for known vulnerabilities, from like research of finding new vulnerabilities. I think research of finding new vulnerabilities, that's where I I at least have not seen folks really meaningfully closing the loop. It's harder to do there because to really verify that you have a vulnerability, you probably need to run things through the whole production system, which is a lot harder, kind of tooling wise or infrastructure wise, than just running unit tests. Uh, Maybe it's happening, but I haven't seen signs of that happening yet. Yeah.
So, Guy, Augment released something new recently, Context Engine MCP, I believe. Can you explain what that is to the audience and why you believe this is so important?
Yeah, so the context engine is our code-based search engine. This is what drives our agent's code-based understanding. It's surfaced as a tool to the agent where if the agent wants to understand anything about the code, it can ask a question and then the context engine will go and figure out what pieces of the code are most relevant for answering that question. So it's a search engine for code, but from our evals and our customer feedback, we know it's very good in terms of the benefit it gives to agents. And so we wanted to provide that capability to users who are not necessarily using Augment's agent. And so we've opened up the context engine on its own as an MCP. And so no matter what agent you're using, you can download our MCP, you can connect it to your agent, and you're going to get the full power of code-based understanding in your favorite agent. And I believe we're doing a promotion right now where using this MCP is not even costing you credits. And so you can use it and see if you like it and kind of see the augment effect of how well it's improving your agent.
Interesting. So is the idea to allow for that usage of other products or to highlight the benefit of Augment and eventually bring those customers into the fold?
Yeah. I think for us, it's either or. If they're using the context engine on its own and they like it, that's a win for us. We are seeing that we are getting better results still from our agent. And so what we're seeing is when we're giving other agents this MCP, we're seeing that they improve. We're still seeing better results from our own agent, which has this tool integrated. And that's probably because with our agent, we have more freedom to do prompting and really nail the balance of you kind of want the agent to understand when should it use this tool versus when it should just go read files, when should it run grep. Getting that balance right takes some extra work that's not just tied into that particular tool. And so we do expect that you'll get even better results if you use our agent. But yes, it's either or. If you like using Augment's context engine as an MCP, we love that. And if that gets you to try Augment and get even better results, that's a great result as well.
And Guy, Augment is very agnostic when it comes to models and apparently other things as well. But I want to just hear from you personally. What model are you using? I asked you this last time we chatted, but I want to ask again. What model are you using currently? Why? And maybe give us like the tier list of your top models and what applications they apply to.
Yes. So right now, I'm using Sonnet 4.5. I went back to it as kind of my daily driver. I find that
Even though
currently
Opus just came out.
Opus came out, yes. I still like Sonnet 4.5. There's something about the speed that you get without having thinking tokens that I really, really like. And so
Is speed completely underappreciated, Guy? Because like I was always a speed backseat, but I feel like everybody else is thinking, oh no, it's all about quality. Take your time, take as much. But I feel like the iteration cycle with a developer, how they're actually working with it, speed is so important, underappreciated. What do you think?
it's absolutely crucial. And I think from what I'm seeing, speed is the reason why, for example, if you compare Sonnet and GPT-5, GPT-5 is an amazing, or 5.1 now, like is an amazing model. Like intelligence-wise and in terms of its agentic capabilities, it's really excellent. In some of our evals, it scores higher than Sonnet. But the fact that it thinks a lot, which slows it down, for me personally, and I think for many users, really drives us to staying with Sonnet. I think speed is very important because I think we're still in this somewhat uncanny valley where the models are not fast enough to kind of run at the speed of thought, right? You kind of have to wait for them, but they're also not that autonomous that you can leave them for an hour and trust that they get back with good results. It's somewhere in between where an extra minute really matters. And those minutes add up. Like if I give it a question and it runs for like a few minutes instead of like 30, 40 seconds, and then I give it another message and another message, and I have to wait that minute every single time, that gets tiring like very quickly. So yeah, I'm definitely on the side that speed really, really, really matters for these models.
So we
I'm
have
remembering that last time we talked to you, I think you were using an unreleased model. Do you remember that? Do you remember what it
Yes.
was?
Yes, that model, I mean, in retrospect, that model was Kimi. We were very
Mm,
excited about that model at the time. In at first, it looked as if, oh, this is like an amazing contender. But then the more me and the more we on the team kind of pushed it, we saw that when you actually push, when you ask it to do simple things, it's as good as Sonnet. But when you push it to do more complex things, it tended to kind of fall apart. And so that's why I moved off of it eventually.
got it.
Yeah.
so we have S tier, Sonnet 4.5. What are you putting in A tier?
A tier, yeah, GPT-5.1 for me is A tier. I haven't played enough with Gemini 3, not as much as I would have liked. For what I saw, it's potentially also A tier. And then I would also put Haiku either A or B tier because Haiku 4.5 is not as intelligent as Sonnet, but it's faster. And
Speed.
that's it's even faster. And so that's again like a really nice feature that it has.
Guy,
Yeah,
my speed maxi brother.
there you go.
All
All right.
right, what
Well,
do you
I suppose now is as good a time as well, Matt, did you have something? I was
No,
going to
do it.
completely shift gears.
Go for it.
Let's talk about the debate around AGI. So you have people like Jan LeCun arguing that current models are a dead end for AGI. Have heard you talk about this a bit, so I want to get your perspective on it. And then you have Sam Altman believes scale is all you need. Um, I believe you were a skeptic early on in your career in tech once you had kind of come over from physics, looking at these digital neurons and thinking like, how can this possibly lead to real intelligence? But yeah, where do you land on that spectrum today?
Oh, so I I don't believe that scale is all we need to get to AGI. I think what's happening now is as we scale things up, we're able to get more and more automation basically out of these models, but I don't believe it's going to get us to AGI. And everything I'm seeing with code kind of strengthens my belief in that because even though code is the place where we are getting, I would say, the most value out of these agents, they still don't seem and again the agents are for me they're writing all of the code, right? But that doesn't mean that they can replace me or that they can replace developers in general. I'm not seeing that happening. um I think, like, if you allow me to get a bit philosophical for a second,
Please.
I think in order to get to AGI, one thing that's really important is that these models should be able to reason outside of their training distribution. Um, to really decide that the model is at the level of full AGI, it means that it should be able to do things like um, perform novel research. Could be scientific research. I mean, could be in cybersecurity, could be in the physical sciences, could be in math, but it needs to be able to do some sort of novel research. In CS, maybe that would mean coming up with novel programming languages or novel approaches to doing software engineering. None of that seems close to me at the moment. And I think it boils down to the fact that we're still training these models to perform tasks that are within their training distribution. They're generalizing to new tasks that they haven't seen before, but the new tasks are still very much within what they were trained to do. I haven't seen any evidence that anything we're doing, including RL training, is getting us away from that. And I don't think that scaling them up with more data and more compute is going to get us away from that. So I do believe that there's a fundamental limitation here that's going to prevent us from getting to full AGI. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not going to get a whole lot of economic value out of them because they're still automating a lot of tasks that we don't want to do as humans. But to me, that's kind of a separate thing from is it AGI?
Okay, so besides the fact that the literal definition of AGI, artificial general intelligence, means that these models have to generalize beyond their training set, do you not think that a bunch of vertical models being maybe RL'd into being experts in whatever field that they're being applied to would be enough to have that same economic impact as AGI is of that definition?
Economic impact. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think if you measure it as economic impact, we're gonna get that I'm just very bullish on. We in terms of keep scaling them, keep investing in basically just keep going down the road we're going down. I'm seeing again, I'm looking mostly at code, but I'm seeing the models getting better at the level of like every few months there seems to be models coming out that are just getting better and better at writing code, right? And they do lead to more automation. So, for example, at Augment now, we are talking a lot more about automating pieces of the software development lifecycle than we are about doing interactive software development like we have in the past. And the reason is simply because the agents have just, and the models have just gotten so good that they can do a lot of tasks in one shot now without any human supervision. That's just the testament. So you can do code review, you can do CI/CD triage, you can do a whole lot of things that weren't really feasible before. So yes, in terms of economic impact, yes, I don't think you need full AGI to get like tremendous economic impact.
Is is
Yeah.
AGI, people are going to call me crazy. Is it even necessary? I mean, if are we trying to kind of fit our understanding of human intelligence and apply that to artificial intelligence? Should we just be thinking about it completely differently? If we can have all of these vertical models, these specialized models, and apply them to every economically valuable task and job out there, is AGI even required?
That's an interesting question. So maybe we can tie that back to the previous question, which is why is code AI for code so impactful compared to other domains? It doesn't seem like what we're doing is it doesn't seem like scale is solving the hallucination problem, for example, right? That's another way of saying that in these other domains where we can't give the models real world feedback, they are failing a lot more often. Now, humans don't fail that often on these other domains because humans have this ability to reason and reach conclusions using logic, which to me is a core part, should be a core part of AGI. My guess is it will be a core part of AGI. And applying logic is a way to get out of your training distribution. And so maybe the answer is that for all these other domains where most of the domains where you don't have the feedback, maybe you do need AGI to unlock the gains, or maybe there'll be some other trick for doing it. Maybe, as you say, it's going to be enough to train like a model that's specialized for law, a model that's specialized for medicine, a model that's specialized for biology, and maybe that will be enough to get around this limitation and unlock the economic value. I don't know. It's an interesting question, but I certainly AGI will be enough to get the economic value, but is it necessary or not? Like, really hard to say.
All right. Guy, I want to thank you so much for joining us once again. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. .com, check him out. You can also find him on Twitter, Guy GR. Guy, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Guy.
All right. So that's our show. I want to thank our guests, Sunny Madra, COO and president of Groq. Go use Groq. Logan Kilpatrick from Google. Obviously, go use Google. Joseph Floyd, general partner at Emergence Capital, and Guy, who just joined us, co-founder of Augment Code. Nick, thank you once again for co-hosting with me today.
Great show. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks to everybody who watched. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Forward Future. We'll be posting some of the clips from today's show there. Check out our newsletter, forwardfuture.ai, and we will see you next week.